A 42-year-old substitute teacher from a small town in Oregon was folding a worn paperback into her lap in seat 12 degrees Celsius when the captain's voice cut across the cabin, steady at first, then not steady at all. The Boeing 737 had just leveled off at 34,000 feet somewhere over the empty skies between Salt Lake City and Denver, United Flight 1874 bound for Chicago. And what happened in the next 11 minutes was something no checklist in the world had ever prepared the crew for. Before we go any further, drop a comment below. What state are you watching from? I read every single one. And if this is the kind of story you came here for, subscribe. There are more coming. The plane was ordinary in every way that mattered to the 147 souls on board that cold February afternoon. Midday light slanted through the windows, turning the cabin into a quiet hum of laptops and half-finished conversations. Most passengers barely noticed the subtle shift in engine tone, but Emily Hargrove, in 12 degrees Celsius, noticed. She closed her book, fingers tracing the cracked spine the way she always did when her mind wandered back to places she tried not to visit. On the surface she looked exactly like what she was, a quiet woman who graded spelling tests between flights and carried extra cough drops for the kids who sat next to her. The flight attendant had smiled at her earlier, the same polite, slightly distant smile reserved for people who didn't seem like they'd caused trouble. Emily had smiled back, said thank you, and returned to her book. But inside her head the voice was already whispering the old question she could never quite silence. What if today is the day you actually need it? She reached into her carry-on and pulled out the small silver compass her father had given her the week before he died. The one he'd carried through 32 years in the left seat of everything from Cessnas to heavy iron. She turned it over in her hands, feeling the familiar weight, then slipped it back into her pocket like a secret she wasn't supposed to still carry. That compass had sat in the same pocket the day her father first put her in the simulator at the old flight school outside Portland. She'd been 27 then, fresh out of college, terrified of the responsibility. He'd been the kind of captain who believed flying wasn't about being fearless. It was about being afraid in the right way. Most people think the sky is empty, he'd told her during one long night session, the simulator rocking gently as they practiced engine-out procedures in icing conditions. But it's not. It's full of decisions nobody else can see. When will you ever need to know this, Em? Maybe never. But the sky doesn't care about maybe. She'd asked him exactly that question once, sweat soaking her shirt after a brutal session where she'd nearly lost the mock aircraft in a holding pattern gone wrong. His answer had stayed with her for 15 years. The day you stop asking that question is the day you stop being ready, a surprising thing most passengers never realize about commercial flights. Even the most routine ones carry tiny redundancies that feel invisible until one of them fails. On this particular 737, the flight data recorder would later show a momentary electrical bus anomaly at 34,200 feet. Something the pilots initially wrote off as a minor glitch in the weather radar. Nothing dramatic, just a flicker. Everything still looked fine from the cabin. The two pilots up front were good men doing a good job. Captain Tom Whitaker, 51, steady hands and a dry sense of humor that kept the jump seat riders relaxed. First Officer Marcus Lee, 34, sharp, ambitious, the kind of co-pilot who already had his eye on the left seat. They'd been trading quiet jokes about the Broncos game when the first warning chimes sounded. In the cabin, Emily felt the plane dip just slightly, the way a car might ease over a frost heave. She glanced out the window. The clouds below had thickened into a solid gray blanket. Nothing unusual for winter over the Rockies. She told herself it was nothing. She was always telling herself that Row 19 had a young mother traveling alone with her 6-year-old daughter, the little girl clutching a stuffed penguin and asking every 5 minutes if they were almost there. Row 7 held a retired Marine who kept checking his watch, probably thinking about his granddaughter's birthday party in Chicago. Normal people. Normal day. Then the second chime came. Sharper. The seatbelt sign clicked on with a soft ding. The flight attendants moved with practiced calm, but Emily saw the tension in their shoulders. She knew that look. She'd seen it in her father's eyes the night he came home from a diversion in Minneapolis. The plane began a shallow descent. Not an emergency descent, not yet, but the kind of measured power reduction that made Emily's stomach tighten. In the cockpit, Captain Whitaker's voice came over the PA again. Warmer this time, the professional tone pilots use when they don't want to scare anyone. Folks, we're experiencing a minor technical issue with one of our systems. We're going to descend to a lower altitude as a precaution. Nothing to worry about, but please remain seated with your belts fastened. Emily's hands were already moving before her mind caught up. She unbuckled, stood, and started walking forward. The flight attendant nearest her, a kind woman named Carla, gently touched her arm. "Ma'am, we need you to return to your seat." Emily looked at her, not with panic, with something quieter. "I need to speak to the captain. I know how to help." Carla's smile faltered. "I appreciate that, but we have procedures. Please, stay with me here. Because what happens in the next few minutes is the part nobody talks about. And once you hear it, you won't be able to forget it. I want you to think about what you would have done in her position. Hold on to that thought." Emily stood there in the aisle, heart hammering against her ribs, the recycled air suddenly tasting metallic. She could go back to 12 degrees Celsius, sit down, pretend she was just another passenger, or she could step into the one role she'd spent 15 years trying to outrun. She chose. The cockpit door opened after the briefest hesitation. Captain Whitaker's face was pale, sweat beading at his temples. First Officer Lee was slumped forward, eyes half closed, breathing shallow. The captain had already declared an emergency. The electrical anomaly had cascaded. Smoke in the avionics bay. Partial loss of primary flight instruments. The autopilot was fighting a battle it was starting to lose. Whitaker looked at the woman in the doorway like she was a hallucination. "Ma'am, you cannot be in here." "I'm a private pilot," Emily said, voice steadier than she felt. "Instrument rated. My father was a captain for 32 years. I've got time in 737 simulators, not type-rated, but I know the procedures. Let me help." The silence that followed was heavy enough to bend metal. Whitaker stared. Then he asked the only question that mattered in that moment. "Can you read a standby attitude indicator and call out deviations while I work the radios?" She could. What followed was not a movie scene. It was sweat and shaking hands, and the low groan of engines fighting thinner air as they descended through 18,000 feet. The sky outside had turned into a whiteout of cloud and ice. The kind of conditions where every decision carries the weight of 147 lives. Emily slid into the jump seat, the familiar layout hitting her like muscle memory she thought she'd lost. The compass in her pocket pressed against her thigh. She could almost hear her father's voice. "The sky doesn't care about maybe—" They lost the second generator 20 minutes later. That's when the real test began. Emily's hands found the yoke when Captain Whitaker needed a second set during a critical transfer of control. She called out pitch and bank like she'd done 1,000 times in the simulator, her voice calm even as her legs trembled. She remembered the exact call-outs her father had drilled into her, the ones that sounded like poetry to outsiders but kept airplanes flying when computers went dark. The unexpected tenderness came when they were still 20 miles from Denver, fighting for every foot of altitude. Captain Whitaker, voice hoarse, looked over at her between transmissions and said simply, "Thank you for not staying in your seat." It wasn't dramatic. It was two exhausted human beings recognizing the weight they were both carrying. The landing was not perfect. The runway rushed up faster than anyone wanted. Thrust reversers deployed late. The tires bit hard and the plane shuddered like it might not stop, but it did. On the ground, emergency vehicles lit up the gray afternoon like Christmas in hell. In the aftermath, Emily sat on the grass near the runway, legs too weak to stand, the silver compass clutched so tightly the edges left marks in her palm. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She kept laughing quietly, then crying, then laughing again. A paramedic wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and didn't ask questions. Captain Whitaker found her later in the terminal, away from the cameras. He didn't give a speech. He just sat down beside her and handed her a cup of terrible airport coffee. "You saved us," he said. "I don't know how to thank someone for that." "You just did," she answered. Weeks later, back in Oregon, Emily stood in the old flight school hangar where her father had taught her. The same simulator sat in the corner, dustier now. Her father's old friend, the instructor who'd run those late-night sessions, met her there. He didn't offer easy wisdom. He just said, "The question you asked him all those years ago, when will I ever need to know this?" The answer was always the same, "The day it happens." Emily turned the silver compass over in her hands one last time. It caught the light from the high windows and flashed like a signal across empty sky. If this story moved you, I have more where this came from. Subscribe so you don't miss what's next. And leave a comment below telling me which moment in this story stayed with you. I genuinely want to know. Do you think we carry the voices of the people who taught us until the exact moment the world needs us to become them? Or do you think the moment itself wakes them up inside us? The sky doesn't answer. It just waits.